All right, everybody, welcome into the Alley-Oop. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn, at NBA Blackburn on Twitter. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We are on to the Central Division. Really excited about the content that is upcoming for today's episode. The last two episodes have been awesome. Really appreciate all the love and support. On this episode, we've got the Chicago Bulls with Kevin Ferrigan, host of the Dennis Podman Show. We've got the Cleveland Cavaliers with Justin Rowan, host of the Chase Down podcast. We've got the Detroit Pistons with Khalil hosting Locked On Pistons. We've got the Indiana Pacers with Caitlin Cooper for Basketball She Wrote. And we've got the Milwaukee Bucks with Ty Windisch, host of the Eurostep podcast. Really excited about this group. What an all-star group that we've got here. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening on the Apple side of things or the Spotify side of things, go subscribe on the YouTube channel. That would really help me out tremendously, even if you're not listening over there regularly. But if you are interested, then those are the individual team previews. That's where I'll write and record the individual content for this show. And that should be really good, really fun, really excited for it, obviously. And how could you not be with such a star-studded cast? Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And now let's get into the episode, the Central Division podcast. But first, the alley-oop.
Middleton, Giannis trailing the lob. Boom! Oh! Run, 2-on-1. Green the finish. Wow, the alley-oop. LeBron turned the corner inside. He made Yusuf Nurkic's screensaver. Here comes Murray. Alley-oop to Gordon. Oh, what a play!
All right, joined now by Kevin Ferrigan at NBA Couchside on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care. He is the host of Dennis Podman with Brian. I love these two, Chicago Bulls podcast. Thank you so much, Kevin, for hopping on, and I'm really excited to hear your Chicago Bulls coverage this year.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, our podcast has been fairly infrequent. we haven't been good about keeping them flowing, but I think last year with the Bulls had a kind of a tough year, and it was hard to get excited to talk about them. Also, I'm frankly just lazy when it comes to being the podcast producer, which is why it's nice to come on and be a guest, because then I don't have to produce. So
hey, that's what I'm here for, baby. That should be fun, should be good. I'm looking forward to the season, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the Bulls. This is going to be a very I think polarizing team for a lot of people. There's been a lot of discussions about what they should do, what they should not do. I think they obviously have some limitations given Lonzo Ball's health situation, but just wanted to hear from you. What do you find is the most interesting thing about this team right now?
To me, it's can they fix their offense? Like, that is the thing that I keep coming back to. And I think that they had very specific weaknesses, and Billy Donovan talked about this at Media Day. But these were things that, if you paid attention to people who know what they're talking about when it comes to the team, and are willing to do like a 5-minute deep dive on cleaning the glass, you could figure out, during the season. But their biggest, they had actually a very good half court offense on first shot attempts. So. And if you look at their shooting percentages and all of that, they were a very efficient shooting team. But the problem was that they didn't get any second shot opportunities. They were one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the league, and they did not push the pace nearly enough. They were one of the lowest frequency transition teams in the league, despite being a pretty decent deflections and turnovers defense. So a lot of that comes down to DeMar DeRozan walking the ball up the court. Right. That he likes to play that very slow and deliberate style. Right. That is, and the other big piece of why they weren't as efficient offensively as they should have been is just that their shot distribution. And again, this goes to DeMar being your lead guy, among other things. But I think this is the biggest driver, is just that he takes 20 shots a game, and almost all of them are coming inside the arc. They needed to push pace, get more offensive rebounds, and figure out ways to generate more threes. I think that they made two pretty good role player signings in the offseason that I think really should help with all of those weaknesses. Javon Carter is a guy that is willing to push the pace and absolutely willing to just, if he wasn't such a good shooter, you'd call them chucking threes, but he will get them up, and he shoots like 40% on them. So I think that those two things will really help the Bulls deal with two of their identifiable weaknesses on offense. I think that the other piece is that Torrey Craig is a really good offensive rebounder for a wing. And the Bulls have suffered a lot for offensive rebounding. I think partially it's a strategy thing. I think Billy Donovan prefers to get back and protect in transition, and stop the other team from getting easy baskets that way. But the downside of that is that you sacrifice those second shot opportunities. And so I think that they probably still won't be like a great offensive rebounding team, just because I do think some of it is strategic. But I think that having somebody like Torrey Craig, who can crash the glass while still being a good defensive player, I think should be helpful in that regard. So I like the moves that they made in the offseason. As far as their free agency moves, I was like not as happy about what they did at the draft. But I think that, and the fact that they have like maybe like 3 or 4 roster spots right now that are like kind of wasted, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was looking at the roster and just trying to figure out just about some of the guys towards the back end and who would push who. And it's not a strong crop at the back end of the roster is what I'll say.
No, I mean, I wrote an article on my blog that 50 people read, but I wrote about it like a year and a half ago, basically just saying that the Bulls and Karnisovas need to do better on the margins, because that is really where they've struggled, I think. And they have to be better on those things, specifically because, they have $20 million a year tied up to Lonzo Ball, who can't play. And, that's not anybody's fault. But it does literally reduce your margin for error. And so that means that you have to hit those marginal signings a lot better. I'm looking forward to Javon Carter trying to do like his best, poor man's Lonzo impression. Because when I talked about the things I talked about in terms of what their weaknesses were offensively, those are like hand in glove fits for like what Lonzo Ball provides. Like he really provided a lot of balance to this roster, and filled in the weaknesses of the other guys on the team. Like he's a really good guard rebounder. He shoots threes at volume at a high percentage, and he gets you out in transition with his hit aheads. So like all of the Bulls' offensive weaknesses last year are solved by Lonzo Ball, but he wasn't back last year like they thought he was going to be, and he's not going to be back this year. I think them not having that hanging over their heads and just knowing that he's going to be out should at least force them to try to play in different ways and to adapt in a way where I feel like some of the players even said it in some of the early media day stuff, that they felt like they were all kind of just waiting for Lonzo to get back to solve all the problems. And he just obviously never came back. So I'm interested to see if Javon Carter can fill like 2 of those 3 gaps that Lonzo had in terms of pushing pace. And he's not going to have the hit ahead passing that Lonzo had, because like really very few people do. He's like one of the best in ever at that. But but it's I think that I like the fits, and that's what I'm kind of interested to see, I guess, more than anything, is do those fits actually solve the problems that were pretty easily identifiable with why their offense, despite all the talent and despite being a good half court offense, weren't able to like actually become an actually good overall offense.
Yeah, there's something to that. And there's something to having, they've got a variety of pieces, I think, that you could go with off the bench that will provide different elements for them. But in the end, I still had their starting lineup as featuring Ayo Dosunmu, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic. That lineup, it's fine. It is not the best group, and I think you can pick and choose some of the reserves, and namely Alex Caruso, Torrey Craig, Javon Carter, as guys that you can pick and choose, and then hope that they can provide different elements here or there. But without Lonzo, it's just hard to see the next step for them. guys like maybe Patrick Williams or Aodosumu, or is there somebody else on the roster that I'm not thinking about that, hey, provides a surprising jump, a surprising amount of production for them that kind of takes them from where they were last year to maybe something better?
I'm a little bit down on Io. I really was impressed with him his rookie year. And he shot the ball better than what most people, I think, coming out of college expected him to that first season. His jumper really regressed a lot, and he's not bursty enough in the half court to really get by guys. He actually has really good finishing numbers, but I think those are somewhat skewed by the fact that he most of his shots at the basket are in transition. He gets blocked like below the rim a lot. He's just he's not a super great like vertical or bursty athlete. So that jumper being good really is key for him. Because he record scratches out of a lot. Like part of their 3-point rate being low is that he and Patrick Williams are both, and Alex Caruso, frankly, are really, all of them are bad at record scratching out of open looks that DeMar or Zach or Vooch would create. And so his jumpers really got to get better. And I thought he put in a lot of work the summer after his rookie year, and I expected it to be better. And it seemed like the form was a little bit better early in the season, like the first couple of games, but it really fell apart for me. And just like the percentage was really bad. And I just don't think he's a helpful offensive player if he isn't at least forcing a closeout. And he can't just record scratch out of open shots. Like even if he's not confident in it and he's only shooting 33%, you still got to put that up just to make the defense like think about it. So yeah, I'm a little down on Io. Like if the jumper shows up this year, then he'll probably be a lot more useful. He's a good defensive player, but I don't really value guys that are like defense only that don't really have anything to bring to the table offensively, which I kind of feel like he is, because he's like an okay passer, but like it doesn't get opened up because he's not enough of a threat to score.
Sure.
So Patrick Williams.
I was just going to wonder how Patrick kind of fits into that conversation.
I've been disappointed with him as well. I mean, I really have not been a big fan of the Karnisovas sort of draft record. Like Io was like, even with the setback last year, Io was still like a good get for a second round pick. There's no denying that. But like Patrick Williams and Dalen Terry as your two like first round draft picks, it's not great. A lot of people in the city wanted Tyrese Halliburton with that pick. He didn't go till 11, so like obviously a lot of teams made that same mistake. But like it wasn't like that was like a fringe opinion. There were a lot of people that wanted him. And Patrick has been fine. Like he's not a terrible player. He's not bad. He's a good defensive player. But he passes up too many open threes. He does not hit the glass for somebody of his physical gifts, which is really frustrating. And for a guy with as good at ball skills as he has, he seems kind of afraid of the ball and he wants to get off of it as soon as he gets it. And often he wants to pass out of it, but like just kind of like hot potato pass, not like a pass that like a productive pass. And so I don't know. I'm hopeful. I see the tools. I see like the little flashes that, Bulls fans that are still holding their Patrick stock and still holding on to hope that he's going to be like the thing that puts him over the top this year. I don't know. I don't see it, but I would love to be wrong. And I think he'll be even if he just continues to improve at like the rate that we've seen, he'll still be like a solid starter, but like star potential, I don't really see that with him anymore.
We will see. We will see what happens with him and with some of these other fringe guys on the Bulls. I do kind of come back to that DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine playing a very similar role, although DeMar's obviously handling with the intention of playmaking for others a little bit more than Zach is. But it is interesting that these guys, they play a very similar style on the wing, or just that scoring wing mentality. There's been a lot of talk about whether they're going to trade Zach LaVine or whether they're going to let go of DeMar DeRozan at some point. I think DeMar's on the last year of his contract, if I want to say, and this seems like it could be the final year of this duo playing together. Do you see this duo sticking around long term, or is this maybe the one last hurrah before a move potentially gets made?
So I know that like the front office would like to move on from Zach, like just straight up, like that has been something that's been, I think reported some places, and I've heard it from other people who know, like, 3 or 4, like I'm not source, but like I know people that know know
Sure.
stuff. And that is something that like I've kept hearing, but they don't want to just give Zach away. They recognize that like he's their most valuable asset. And I think that that's a reason you haven't seen a Zach LaVine trade is because they're getting lowball offers because Zach has only ever played for incompetent organizations like the Timberwolves and the Bulls. So he hasn't been, a quote unquote winning player, but I don't really believe in that so much. Like, I think that like teams win, players don't really. And I think, yeah, Zach was bad early in his career. He was really young and he came in very raw, but I think he's been a winning player for a while now, and it's just not recognized because he's not slotted next to a true, star player, like a top 10 guy. Like if you put, I think if you put Zach LaVine on the Celtics in place of Jaylen Brown, I think the Celtics improve. Like I genuinely believe that he's a much better, more dynamic scorer. He's better finisher, better dribbler. And Zach's not even like that great of a dribbler, but he's better than Jaylen.
That's much low bar.
Yeah. Much better shooter, like way better, like I said, way better at finishing. And like they have this, like pretty much the same strengths and weaknesses on defense. I think Jaylen's a little bit better on ball defense than Zach, but like Zach's pretty good now at on ball defense. He's just like still kind of gets lost off the ball sometimes. And so does Jaylen, but Jaylen, that stuff gets covered up because he plays consistently with 4 other like really high level defensive minds pretty much all the time. So in any event, I think that he and Zach has cost control with like the CBA going up. I think that like I've been shouting about this for a little while now, just that like Zach's contract is good, actually. Like people are talking about it like it's an albatross, and it's like, no, he got locked in on the sub, not the super max, on the regular max, and he got locked in on it under like the lower CBA before it really explodes. I mean, it's been getting bigger and bigger all the time, but like the numbers that like Jaylen is signing to, and like even Dame's supermax, it's just like those are bad contracts. Zach's contract is like pretty good, actually, especially if you get him to a situation where he's on like a team with like a real number one and he doesn't have to feel like he should be that guy, which is, I think that's really one of the issues with DeMar and Zach, is that I think DeMar is today slightly better than Zach, and definitely better on offense. But it's close enough that Zach is justified in thinking that he's better, because like that's what you want from NBA players, is for them to be confident. And that lack of hierarchy, I think, is a source of friction. Or to the extent that the hierarchy exists and DeMar is kind of treated as the guy at the end of games, I think Zach kind of chafes under that. And I think that's honestly part of the reason why they have looked to move him if there's value, but the value hasn't been there in the market, and they're not going to just sell him for nothing.
Completely fair. And you wouldn't want any organization to do that if it was your team. So totally understand why. All right. Well, then here, let's wrap this one up here. Give me your win prediction for the Bulls this year and what you think they can do to make a playoff run this year.
So I think 43, 44 wins is where I'm at with them. I do think that their additions are going to make them a better team. They specifically address some of their weaknesses. And I also think the Bulls had like a better point differential last year than what their record was. And they also had 4 games where on the very last second call, like literally the last call of the game, the refs got it wrong by the last 2-minute reports, and every one of those cost them a win. So they would have been a 44 win team last year. I don't think they got worse. I understand people saying that they're not going to be as healthy as they were last year. But Zach played like the first third of the season on one leg. And since Zach got back from his ACL surgery, Zach plays a lot of games every year. DeMar and Vooch pretty much play every year because they don't jump, so they don't get hurt. Now you have to knock on wood, but my thing is that those guys play. Like, expecting them to be healthy is not like abnormal, and like this idea that Zach is like this super injury prone guy is just doesn't hold up if you look at like the minutes, loads, and games played that he's had the last 3 years since he got back from his ACL surgery. What would it take for them to like make a run in the playoffs? I mean, I don't see it. I think they're a first round out pretty much no matter what. The top of the East is too good, and they will not be a home court advantage team, I don't think, even like in the most optimistic scenario. But yeah, if they were going to get to the second round, it would be like having some like run where everything goes their way and they get to like the 4 seed and then they get to, beat the 5th seed or whatever. Like, that's the only way I could see it happening.
Gotcha. Well, we will see what happens. I currently have this team penciled in at 39 wins. I'm a little bit more skeptical than you, and just in terms of,
well, I'm a fan. I'm supposed to be
fair, completely fair. Just what some of the actual additions will provide, and whether this defense is going to hold up the way that it did last year, and like if that's going to be, if it's going to be 6th overall, or if it's going to be maybe 10th or somewhere around there, and just see a little bit of regression. But we will see what happens. I'm looking forward to covering it all. Kevin, thank you so much for hopping on. Really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck this season, man. Going to be great.
Thanks. I mean, I'm looking forward to the ride. That's my message for all Bulls fans. Try enjoying the ride. Like, don't like, it's okay. It's okay for your team to be just okay. Like, just enjoy your guys, enjoy the ride. Only a few teams every year are title contenders, and the Bulls don't have a path to get there anytime soon. So like, relax.
It's going to be okay. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Joining me now is Justin Rowan, who's covering the Cavaliers for the Chase Down podcast. One of the cool things about the Chase Down is it became associated with the Cavaliers family. Was it last year or the year before? It feels like that's been going strong now.
Longer.
Wow.
February 2021. This will be our second full season with it. But it's been surreal. We actually got to go down and host Media Day this year, which was a lot of fun. So, continuing to live this surreal dream life of mine.
The best Cavaliers coverage around. There's nobody I could have asked to do this other than Justin or Carter, but like I'll take Justin for this for the purposes of this one. How are you doing?
I'm more friendly than him. Let's be honest about what this is.
He's got some Cowboys sadness to get over, I think.
Exactly.
How are you doing, man? What's the most interesting thing going with the Cavs right now?
God, I mean, the most interesting thing, obviously you're trying to see how these additions work out, right? Because the biggest need that they had going into the last offseason was shooting. And Max Strus, we identified pretty early on, was kind of our top target that we wanted to see the Cavs go after and see if they could get him with the mid-level exception. They ended up getting a little bit creative and getting him in a sign and trade, which kept the mid-level exception available to sign George Niang, bringing in, Ty Jerome, Damian Jones, all these kind of additions to bolster the depth. But, those are the fun things we're keeping an eye on. And, on the more negative side is the bone bruise that Jared Allen's dealing with in his foot. It doesn't sound too serious. JB had clarified that this is a situation where it's kind of been a nagging injury for a while. It's not like he landed on a foot in practice and all of a sudden was in pain. So I think they're playing it safe. I saw that he's in Atlanta tonight for the preseason game, was, working out on the exercise bike and not walking around with a limp or anything like that. So I think our fingers are crossed that he'll be available for opening night.
Well, hopefully so, because this is one of the strongest starting lineups in the league. I recently ranked them, I think, the 4th strongest starting lineup, because they have the pedigree that you're looking for with the 4 stars kind of surrounding that small forward spot, and it looks like Max Strus is going to fit into that. I would assume.
Yeah. I think the assumption right now is that Max Strus is going to start. JB, of course, is not naming one yet, but. When asked at Media Day if Max, if he expected to start, he said that is his expectation. And I think it's just what makes the most sense. We saw last year a variety of starting lineups had worked. Basically, the only one that didn't was the core four with Lamar Stevens. But outside of that, the Karis LeVert one, I think, had a net rating over 10. The Isaac Okoro lineup had been very good. But as much as Okoro has shown growth, I think that moving Max Strus in the starting lineup and giving that lineup more spacing is going to be great for them. And I think it's going to be great for him coming in off the bench, playing with just one big on the court and having more space for him to kind of showcase his game as a cutter.
So let's talk about it then. Let's talk about how important it was to add that spacing, because it was a clear expectation that this was going to happen for the Cavs. And you go out and get a couple of the best shooters on the open market in Max Strus and Georges Niang. How important is it going to be to layer those guys into what the group already has? Because it feels like that was kind of like the Nuggets last year, where you add guys like KCP, Bruce Brown, Christian Brown, the wing defenders. Mm-hmm. Now it feels like, hey, you've got the shooters to surround the star quartet that you've got.
Yeah, and the Nuggets are a team that the Cavs bring up quite frequently, of the value of continuity and, the difference that making adjustments to the supporting cast, just how big of a difference that can make. And I think, I think there's enough support with the Cavs this season to properly evaluate how good the core is. Because the Cavs, their bread and butter, their fastball was phenomenal last year when it came to, the three-man actions they ran, the split cuts. Basically, everything they did in the regular season seemed to work. And then when you go to the playoffs and the Knicks are saying, okay, well, we're going to sag off of Evan Mobley because we don't believe he's a viable scoring threat from the free throw line if you can't get to the basket. And we're going to kind of jam up that bread and butter. You don't have another pitch to go to in your arsenal. And I think this is going to make the Cavs more versatile. And I think it's going to make it harder to take away those kind of bread and butter plays, because you look at it, the last 2 years, Max Strus was in the 4th percentile in terms of the openness of his three-point attempts. This guy is one of the most tightly guarded players in the league. Either that's going to change and his quality of looks are going to get a lot better, or you are really giving some real quality players for the Cavs some of the best opportunities that they've had. So I think that this is going to be an interesting year to see how JB Bickerstaff and the coaching staff evolve the offense to incorporate those shooters. And I know one of the things they've talked about is going back to a little more of the motion offense that they ran 2 years ago with Lauri Markkanen at the three, where, they had him kind of playing off ball and doing some of those sets that we'll likely see with Max Strus. So it'll be interesting to see how the two styles kind of merge, of the post-Donovan Mitchell trade and the pre-Donovan Mitchell offense that the Cavs ran.
Barring health, obviously, and I know Jared Allen's obviously dealing with stuff immediately, I think this team's going to kill the regular season. Just demolish it. And there are a lot of reasons to believe that this team could even have the best record in the NBA. Just given the layers that you can add to a regular season rotation, whether it's staggering Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, staggering Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. As you get the growth of those guys and you mix in the correct role players around them, if all four kind of go in the right direction, then I don't see any reason why this team can't really challenge for one of those top spots. I don't have them penciled in there yet, but I do think that there's absolutely a reason why this team can continue to grow. So where do Evan Mobley and Darius Garland in particular go from here? That's on my list of things, because I think we know what Donovan Mitchell is mostly. I think we know what Jared Allen is mostly, and they're great, like an all-NBA guard and a great starting center. What are Darius Garland and Evan Mobley going to be this year?
Well, first of all, you're a coward for not penciling the Cavs as number one. You look at kind of the guys that Boston, Milwaukee have. I think those teams are a tier above when you talk about like power rankings of how good those teams are. But they're shallow and they have guys that miss a lot of time. So I think with that in mind, given the Cavs continuity as well, not trying to integrate a major piece this late into the process, I think that should be the goal. Because if you're talking about the best path to postseason success, it's setting yourself up with a strong regular season. I mean, the Cavs went to 4 straight finals. I don't believe they were the 1 seed once. Like, we too often we kind of conflate what the regular season standings could be with power rankings. And right. I think the Cavs have a chance to kill in the regular season. And a lot of it is going to hinge on Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. I think from Darius' standpoint, the fact that they were able to integrate Donovan Mitchell and he still was basically at that career high in points per game. I think it was 0.1 points lower while, integrating Donovan Mitchell. I think that was a real feather in his cap. And probably if you exclude his first game of that season where Gary Trent Jr. poked his eye out, it probably was the same points per game. But I just want to see more assertiveness out of him. I think, as much as they added 3-point shooting with the additions in free agency, Darius needs to, crank those numbers up. He needs to take more 3-point attempts. He needs to really be a threat. Anytime someone goes under, he needs to make those teams play. And that's one of the things he's acknowledged that he needs to do is just continue to be more assertive. And then from Evan Mobley's standpoint, I mean, all summer, all offseason, Carter and I were talking about how if we had our way, we would be forcing Evan Mobley to watch a lot of tape of Bam Adebayo. And turns out he's been watching tape of Bam Adebayo, and Max
Look at
Strus
that.
has been dialing up those clips of the two-man game that those two had. I think people often focus a lot on the three-point shot and whether or not that's going to progress. But if Mobley is that viable threat in the short roll, if he is a scoring threat from the free throw line, forcing defenses to come up, I think that would really help showcase his ability as a passer, because I do think that that's one of his strongest offensive traits. And if he can be that kind of central hub, that is going to be the key to postseason success. Because I think the biggest point of failure in the Cavs playoff offense was Evan Mobley. Because anytime you see an offense that revolves around a backcourt, it never works in the playoffs unless you have that front court playmaking, whether that's a Draymond Green, a LeBron James. Jokic, the way that he's able to create for guys, right? Like that frees up the guards to have those spot up opportunities and makes it harder for teams to blitz and trap and make life hell for a guy like Jamal Murray. And I think the Cavs just didn't have that. Evan Mobley wasn't ready to translate that aspect of his game to the regular season and playoffs. So that's going to be the number one focus for us, because we know this team's going to be great in the regular season. It's how much growth has Evan Mobley shown to be that kind of front court playmaker to alleviate the stress from the guards.
The things that I would kind of identify outside of just the standard 3-point shot that I think it would be helpful if he had a nice pick and pop jumper and things like that. But more than anything, it's that short roll mid-range jumper that if you are leaving somebody wide open in the middle of the floor and the only guy standing in his way is this big 7-footer at the rim who's attached to Jared Allen's hip, then you rather than attack that guy over and over again and get into contested shots, just go for the easy one and go for the floater, go for the mid-range jumper. There's a lot there. And then obviously the spraying the ball out along the floor to those other guys. If he can do that, he's already athletic enough that he can get around and eat like a half-hearted contest at the mid-range and short roll area. If he can avoid those other contacts, then that's going to be a great thing for him. I think this team is clearly third in the pecking order in the East. I think just given the additions of Damian Lillard and Drew Holiday to the two top contenders, and given the falterings of the Heat and of the Sixers this year, I think it's a clear delineation between 1, 2, and then 3 with the Cavs, and then 4, 5, whatever with everybody else. How does this team match up with those groups in your estimation?
And that's a great question, because they really changed their identity in a lot of ways, right? Like Milwaukee, so much of it was, we are going to make your life hell at the point of attack, and we're going to have that backline support there. If that's not there, like if I saw a quote that Malik Beasley is supposed to be, the guy taking the toughest perimeter assignments, and I just wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. So with that, it's going to be a totally different dynamic if you're assuming Damian Lillard and Malik Beasley, or even if it's Pat Connaughton. That's going to create opportunities for Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. I still think, Lillard and Giannis pick and roll, that's going to be the most deadly play in the NBA. I think I've also seen too many times on the other side of these situations where, yeah, you can talk about matchups and whatnot, but the best player wins the series. And I think Giannis is that guy. And that's why Milwaukee's my pick to make it out of the East. But you look at Boston, I have a lot of respect for what Drew Holiday does, but I think in overall kind of net impact on the defensive end, it's probably a wash with him and Marcus Smart. I don't necessarily love the fact that they downsized where, your front court's going to be Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kristaps Porzingis in a conference where you have to deal with the size of a Joel Embiid or Giannis in the middle or, the big men that the Cavs have. I don't necessarily love what they're doing. I know they kind of over-indexed to the offensive end of the court, so we'll see how much Al Horford stands up. But it just seems like your Kristaps foul trouble away from like Lamar Stevens getting serious playoff minutes or really banking on Al Horford. So I'm interested to see what that dynamic's like and how, Kristaps Porzingis, how happy he is if he's, not getting as many touches as he did in Washington. So I think they match up in interesting ways, but it's going to be a matter of, what we see in the regular season. Like, okay, is Boston able to generate enough point of attack defense that it's hard to exploit their interior? Is Milwaukee's interior defense so good that it makes it hard to exploit their point of attack defense, right? Like it's opposite ends of the same coin, but I'm really interested to see what those matchups look like because Cavs were a great matchup against Boston last season. So I'm interested to see what happens there and if Drew Holiday gives them enough of an offensive boost to make up for some of what they've lost.
It is funny when I was doing this and kind of preparing for this, I thought about it in the opposite way, honestly, where a lot of what the Celtics are providing and then the spacing that they're going to have against a team in the Cavs that is going to try to defend from the inside out. And you've got some smaller guys in Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Max Strus on the perimeter that it could be difficult to guard in space or guard against some of those other guys. So that's going to be fascinating. But I do think that this team matches up well with the Bucks. Like it's like you're going to run pick and roll with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell and Damian Lillard or Pat Connaughton are the guys that are having to guard on the perimeter. That's like, the Bucks are going to drop. Like that's going to be the case of the matter. So it's fascinating to think about those dynamics, but it's going to be this incredible round robin, I think, to try to figure out who is going to come out of there. And I'm very curious to see what happens there. All right. Tell you what, give me a win prediction for this team. Where you staking your claim?
Well, I mean, I'm here to be an optimist. Like that is what it is. I'm going to say 56. I think it's going to be pretty flat in the Eastern Conference. Last year, the Cavs expected wins per cleaning glass was 55. They had really bad injury luck, didn't finish some games. I think, like even if they had the same kind of level of injury luck, obviously knock on wood that there's no major ones, but they're just such a deeper team. And when you're projecting for internal growth, they're right back around that 55, 56 wins. I think that would be a major accomplishment. And I mean, as much as I'm interested in how they match up against Milwaukee and Boston, I'd rather only play one of them. Like, I'd much rather get the 1 seed, let them beat up on each other, and then, you had the real competition in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, that to me would be best case scenario. Because I think if the Cavs end up in that 2-3 bracket and they have to play one of them in the second round, I don't know if I would pick the Cavs in that series. So I think, taking the regular season very seriously and trying to put yourself in the best position possible should probably be a priority for the Cavs.
I have them at 52 wins and the 3rd seed, but that is a great point in my mind about, hey, the best way to make it deep into the playoffs is have to play the least competition possible. And the Nuggets were able to take advantage of that this last year, where you get the 8th seed, you play the 4 seed in the second round, and then the 7th seed makes it in the conference finals, and the 8th seed makes it in the finals. You didn't game plan for that, but it just happened, and the bracket broke right for you at that point. So if you
control your own luck, right?
Exactly. You make the 1 seed, and you let the other teams have to pick and choose who gets to face you in the conference finals. That sounds way better. But I do think that 52 is where I have them immediately right now. But there's certainly an argument for them to go higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, health is going to be a big factor. I think the East is just really, really good this year. Like, I think it's deep. I don't think there's a lot of teams that got objectively worse. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that shakes out and, how much of an integration period there is. And I mean, you look at the first 10 games for the Cavs, I think every single one of those teams has postseason expectations or is aiming for that as a goal. So they're going to be thrown into the fire right away, and hopefully Jared Allen is healthy for that.
We will see what happens. Before we head out of here, give me one bold prediction on your way out.
Ooh, I think that this is the year where, even if it's not consensus, I think this is going to be the year where there is an argument to be made that Darius Garland is the best player on the Cavs.
Ooh, that's an interesting one, because he's probably the guy that people think third most about, behind Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley.
Yep. Yeah, and I think when you look from an impact standpoint, like the on-off splits, Darius was that top guy again last season. I think no matter what, like the ultimate vision for this team is that Evan Mobley is their best player. But I think even if he is their best player and most impactful player, he's still probably going to be third in points per game. And Darius is going to be the floor general. He's going to be the guy that's in command of this offense. And I still think even if he can make that impact, that he's the best player this year, Donovan's still going to be the leading play finisher. He's still going to be the leading scorer. So it's going to be like one of those things where, all the nerds like myself are all going to be debating, well, Mobley's third in points per game, but he has the most impact. Well, Darius, he's the one that gets everybody going, and he's giving you 24 points per game and 10 assists. But Donovan's the leading scorer. Like, it's all going to be kind of a eye of the beholder type thing. But I think that this is the year where Darius makes a leap from, all-star snub to legitimate all-NBA consideration.
I love it. That should be that's the way to win a championship. If you're the Cavs, you have to make sure to get the most out of every piece, and he's a guy that you can get more out of for sure. So should be very fascinating to track. He is Justin Rowan, covering the Cavaliers for the Chase Down Pod with Carter Rodriguez. Guys, thank you so much, and Justin, good luck this year, and hopefully we can speak again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And, hopefully things get weird. Hopefully things get weird and then we can start doing finals previews. If not this year, 2025, we'll be there. Don't you worry.
Love it. All right, joining me now is Khalil, covering the Detroit Pistons for Locked On Pistons. Thank you so much for hopping in. Really appreciate your Detroit coverage for this upcoming season.
I appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to talking about the Pistons, especially after their first preseason game. There's a lot to look forward to.
Hey man, this is a young team, an interesting team, lots of different layers to the prospects that are here. But I think we got to start with Cade, right? Like that's probably the most interesting factor for this team with his development right now, right?
Yeah, I think that is. I mean, everything's going to revolve around Cade. The Pistons are going to go as far as Cade takes them, whether that's another below 30-win season, a 30-plus win season, whatever it is, they're only going to go as far as Cade takes them. So, yeah, he's definitely the biggest piece of all of this.
His development is, I think it's been controversial or at least polarizing from different perspectives. Like the efficiency people have talked about as being a little bit shaky, and then you miss basically all of last season with the injury. Where do you think he's at right now? How did he look in the first preseason game? And what do you think Detroit Pistons fans can expect this year?
I think Cade, I'm very high on Cade. I think Cade's going to be amazing. I think he's going to be great. Whether he's going to be great this season, we're obviously going to have to wait and see. But everything I've heard from his camp, I got to interview his brother earlier in the offseason. Everything I've heard from them, he's great. He's in great health. He's 100%. He was able to have a full offseason. The injury didn't impact any of his offseason stuff. He was able to go full throttle. And obviously, he played really well Team USA from everything we've heard. Obviously, these are just pickup runs, so don't read too much into any of them, but he's looked really good there. So I think he's going to have a really good year. In the first preseason game, kind of knocking some rust off, it felt like, taking a lot of jumpers. Didn't shoot very well from the floor. It was 5 of 15. Started to heat up a little bit in the third quarter, started to play pretty well. But it's a preseason game, and everyone stopped playing. Basically, I think like halfway through the third quarter, didn't play again after that. But the only thing with Cade, since we're talking about his efficiency, the only thing with Cade, I think the efficiency is a little bit overblown for what it's worth. I do think the pull-up three-point shooting has to come around, because that was like the biggest thing. One of the biggest things about him coming out of college is that he's this 6'7", 6'8" dude, playmaker, can get to the rim, and he can shoot from three when you go under screens. Like, if he's going to have to be able to shoot from three for sure for him to be what we all think he is. I think he's going to. But the only thing I will say about the efficiency stuff is that even in the first preseason game, now I think this has a lot to do with the makeup of a roster and what he's been given, which I hope kind of changes at some point this season. But he's kind of being forced into a tough shot diet, which I'd hope it improves. Taking a lot of mid-range shots. Now, last year, before he went down, he was one of the best pull-up mid-range shooters in the league. So I understand that's one of his. If you want to take mid-range shot, that's completely fine. Those who have that part of their game is big time, especially as a pick-and-roll threat.
Sure.
But you don't want your entire game to be relying on it, too. So I'd like to see him take a little bit more shots at the rim, take a little bit more threes, and kind of balance out the mid-range shots. Not don't take them, just balance out a little bit more across the 3 levels. That's the only critique I have around his efficiency. I think that will help. But like I said, I think that has a lot to do as well with what he's being surrounded with on the court.
It's completely fair. And especially with young guys, a lot of it is going to be context dependent, and you can't pigeonhole guys into what they're going to look like in their first year or two, just because there's so much that is like it's focused on the situation around him. And I look at the double bigs. I look at a lot of the rotations that, like when Detroit is trying to basically have him work in a phone booth and say, "Hey, we're gonna need you to create everything for this," and that's just a lot of pressure to put on a young guy. So, what is the direction that this team is going to take from maybe the starting lineup perspective? It sounds like they might be dropping down to one big a little bit more frequently.
I mean, that's the hope. I'm completely with you with this double big stuff. I've been very vocally against the double big stuff going all the way back to when they first tried it. The thing is, I know that Troy Weaver has spent a lot of time talking about, you want to match up with the bigger teams in the Eastern Conference. And one of the teams that always gets mentioned is the Cavs. And I don't understand why everyone keeps talking about the Cavs and the Pistons fan base and the Pistons community and those around the Pistons. Keep talking about the Cavs like this team that's made the finals and it's like the team to beat. They just lost in the first round. Like, I don't think you should be crafting your team around, how are we going to beat those guys? Like, I don't think that's like how you should be building your team. Right. I do understand the size argument, but you also need to have the personnel to run the 2 bigs. And the Pistons just don't have those kind of versatile big men to make that work. So I think they're going to go less double big and kind of go to 1 big, hopefully. That would really help Cade. But to be honest, this is something that, this is something I'm talking about on the podcast now. And we'll probably be talking about over the next few weeks is that, playing Isaiah Stewart at the 4 in the starting lineup probably is still kind of doing the double big stuff. Because, even in the first preseason game, I talked about it all yesterday on the podcast. In the first preseason game, they'd run pick and rolls and have Stu in the corner. And Phoenix's defenders were just tagging so aggressively on the pick and roll that it was really taking away the role for Duren and any kind of driving lane for Cade, and they'd kick it out to Stu. And there's no percentage that Stu's going to be able to hit at that forces defenses to say, we don't want to give up a Stu 3. We'd rather deal with Cade and Duren and pick and roll. Like, there's no percentage he can hit that's going to change that. And there's no percentage that's going to change whether the Pistons think that's an offense they're willing to deal with, willing to live with. So the starting lineup, I do think you may see Stu possibly go to the bench at some point. But yeah, the team needs to go with the 1 big, and they need to craft this team a little bit better around Cade this upcoming season if they want to really see him flourish, which I think he can.
And it seems like they've had at least pretty decent personnel to try that. Like Monte Morris coming in this year, Asar Tarabson coming in this year. There's some young guys and some smaller guys that, Cade's 6'7", 6'8", like you mentioned. The defense it'll drop off just a little bit, but the actual benefits that you could see from going a little bit smaller, I do think is very real. So tell me about Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman, this collection of bigs. You mentioned Jalen Duren as the guy that everybody thinks, hey, you're going to build around him. Is he the big man of the future for this team?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Not even close. He's the center of the future for the Pistons. I think he's going to have multiple All-Stars in his future. I think he's going to be absolutely fantastic. This is a dude who I think is probably like 7 years away from what his prime is going to be. He's 19 years old. In 7 years, he's going to be like 25, 26. Like, he's not even like, we're not even close to where his prime is going to be. That's how young this dude is. It kind of reminds me a little bit. Now, they're not, they're a little bit similar as players, but it kind of reminds me of like Andre Drummond with the Pistons, where he was drafted at 18 and you didn't really see him hit his prime until he was like 24, 25. And that was like 7 years after he was originally drafted. I see the jokes all the time. It's like when Andre Drummond has a birthday, they're like, oh my God, this dude's only 30, only 29. I thought he was like 40 years old. But it's kind of going to be like the same thing with Duren because of how young he is. He has such a long runway to develop and add so many things. But yeah, I think Duren's going to be great. The the big man rotation is just, there's not, outside of Jalen Duren, there's not a lot of versatility within the Pistons front court with those guys. I mean, Stu is the one trying to add some versatility, but again, I know it's just one preseason game, but it's exactly what I thought you would see and what we saw last year, which is you're really trying to force him into simply being a stretch big, and there's just not going to be a percentage that he can shoot, realistically shoot, that will make it work to a point where the spacing will be respected and everything flows correctly. Even in the first preseason game, you saw them try to run, which Monty has kind of talked about a little bit, and Troy Weaver's kind of talked about, Duren at the hub a little bit, try to run the offense to him at the high post, use his passing ability, which he's a really good passer. And there was a few times you saw him go the direction, the Suns would force him towards Stu's side, and Stu's just not versatile enough to come off a dribble handoff. Like, that's nowhere near something he can do in this game. So it created a lot of clunkiness when the Suns would force him that way. Because Stu was like, oh, am I supposed to come around this? Do I do it? And he'd come around it. Duren knows he can't do it, doesn't give it to him. Now you got 4 guys on one side, and it's just like it disrupts the entire spacing of the floor. But Stu, he does provide versatility defensively. He's a good switch defender, aggressive defender, and they are trying to get him to be a spacer at the floor. The other 2 guys, I mean, Bagley he's a bucket, that's for sure. He's a guy that there has to be some value to that. A dude that can come in and just score a point per minute, basically. Like, he's going to come in and just score the basketball just by rolling to the rim, catching lobs, offensive rebounds, and dunking everything he can. And he did make a 3 a few days ago, so I mean that's for what that's worth. But Bagley has his own deficiencies on the defensive side. He has a really good chemistry with Cade, Killian Hayes, hopefully he has it with Monty Morris, but he has a good chemistry with Cade, Jaden Ivey, and Killian Hayes. And then when it comes to Wiseman, I think he's the odd man out. He just has so many things that he needs to work on, and so many things he has to get better at. And he just does not fit, I think, with what they need out of a center with this team. So I think he's the odd man out. I don't want to spend too much time going at Wiseman because he has a very lively fan base, and they very much show up anytime you say anything. So I don't want to go too far with it. Just I think he's probably going to end up being the odd man out.
It's a numbers game, if we're being frank, and to me it seems like the right course of action eventually would be, hey, you build around Duren. Isaiah Stewart's like your perfect 7th or 8th man off the bench, somebody who can play next to him at times, but you don't want that to be your first punch, and then gives you that versatility with the second unit. But that's a question for another day. Tell me about the dynamic between Jaden Ivey and Ausar Thompson, because it seems like Ausar may want to start. Like, it seems like Ivy's going to want to start, and both of those guys probably view themselves as future stars in the league. How's that going to work?
I'd hope that they start all 3 of them together. I don't see why they wouldn't start Cade, Ausar, and Ivy together. But in this first preseason game, I know Ivy came off the bench, which was really shocking to Pistons fan base, even though James Edwards III of The Athletic, he kind of wrote twice over the last 2 weeks that was something that they were maybe considering. Jaden Ivey was asked about coming off the bench or starting, and he said the goal is just to win. And that, I know that's like kind of the QB answer, but before those articles, before he was asked that, if you would have asked me, is Jaden Ivey going to come off the bench, I would have said 100% not. Don't even entertain talking about it. So the fact that was something that was even being talked about already perked my ears. I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting that's something even being talked about right now.
Fair.
And he did end up coming off the bench in the first preseason game. I don't think that's something that's going to last. I think they're going to probably start him when the season comes around. I think that they're choosing the wrong person to bring off the bench. If they are trying to pick one, it should be Stu. I think they should bring off the starting lineup should be Cade, Ivy, Ausar, Bojan, and Duren. If they want to start Ausar Thompson, which he looked really good in the first preseason game. I love Ausar. He was I loved him. He was in my top 5 when I was doing draft coverage. I loved him and his brother. I think his brother is going to be a superstar, but I love Ausar. So I think he's going to be good enough to start immediately, simply because I believe in some of his skill sets, but also because there's no other wing on the Pistons team that has any kind of functionality when it comes to the defensive end outside of Ausar, and you need that. And his athleticism is just a needed jolt to the team. I think those 2 can play together, and I think they should be playing together. If they don't start together, I still think you're going to see them close with them. I think you'll see stretches throughout the game with them playing together. I'd be shocked if they don't start together. But even when Ivy didn't start that preseason game, you got long stretches when it was Killian Hayes, Ivy, and Asar playing together. So I don't think they're never going to play together, even if he doesn't start. But I'd honestly be shocked if they don't start together.
We'll see how it breaks out. There's a lot of questions. I do think that given the number of questions and given the number of uncertainties with the direction that the offense versus the defense and the big man dynamic wants to go, I still have this team only winning 25 games, despite the fact that they have more talent than that. I think it's clear. I believe in Cade. I think that he's going to be fantastic. I still have some questions about the rest of the development and the direction that that's going to go. But I think that Cade is a great long-term piece, and it's really about who is going to join him. Where do you see this team finishing?
This is the problem is that last year, do I think that they were a bottom 3 team? Yes, I think they were going to be a bottom 3 team no matter what happened. But I don't think they were 17 wins bad if Cade would have played. I think they probably would have hovered around like 21, 22 wins, which again is not good. You're still probably one of the worst. Would that have been the worst team in the league still, 21, 22 wins? I think it might have.
It's about right. Like I think San Antonio was about there too.
Yeah, so you still would have been one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league. You just wouldn't have been 17 wins bad, which is why I bring that up to say I think they should be able to reach 32 wins. Looking at 17 to 32, a 15-win jump for a young team is pretty huge. My argument is that they actually wouldn't be really making a 15-win jump because they were actually like a 21, 22-win team if Cade played. So then you'd really be looking at like a 10-win jump, which still is a pretty big jump. I know their over under is 28.5 with FanDuel. Would I be spending my money to bet the over? No, I would. I'd keep my money in my pocket. Should the players in the team be thinking they can reach 32? Yes, that should be the goal for them, at least 32 wins. It's going to be hard because the East did not get worse, and a lot of the teams that we thought maybe would blow it up did not blow it up, in like Chicago and Toronto and teams like that. So it's going to be tough to do so, but that should be the goal within for sure. But I don't see this team, like if I had to take a guess and like my educated guess, I'd say, I mean, they probably finished bottom 3 again in the East, and they're just more competitive this year. Like maybe they're not just straight awful, but like they shouldn't be just awful. But I just can't see them jumping too many teams in the East because no one really like decided to, hey, we're just going to blow it up and go to the bottom of the rankings. Like there's a lot of teams that said, hey, we're okay with like being in this middle ground. That didn't really get worse, and that kind of impacts the Pistons a little bit. So I know Pistons fans don't want to hear this. If any of them listen, I'm sorry. Look, I want to see them win a lot of games too, but it's just going to be tough. Cade, I'll say this. The last thing I'll say about it is this. When I watch Cade highlights and watch his best games, I have a little devil on my shoulder that says, "Coup, bet the over. They're going to win 35 games. Do it." Every time I have a little devil on my shoulder that says it, but I have to. I can't do that.
Hey, I mean, who knows? I mean, sometimes if a star develops before your eyes, it changes the trajectory of a group. And maybe Cade is that guy. I think there's at least enough general questions that it may not happen immediately. And coming off of basically a full season loss, it may take him some time and the team might start pretty bad. So I think there's reason to both have some faith and also to have some skepticism here. But give me one bold prediction on your way out.
Bold prediction. Cade wins most improved player.
Ooh, there we go. I love that. That's and he is the exact kind of guy that you're looking to win that 3rd-year jump. A little bit shaky, and then had the missed time. Obviously, I could see 23, 7-7, something like that for him. That would be awesome.
That's basically what I'm projecting for him. 23, around 23, 6-6, 7, like somewhere around there. I think that's something he definitely can achieve.
Well, here's to it, man. He is Khalil covering Detroit for the Locked On Pistons podcast. Make sure to go follow his work at Khalil. Thank you so much, my guy. We will chat again soon, and good luck this year.
Appreciate you, man.
All right, joining me now is Caitlin Cooper covering the Pacers for her own Patreon basketball. She wrote. Caitlin, thank you so much for hopping on with me. I'm very excited to talk about the Pacers with you this year.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on to talk about the Pacers this year. I'm always happy to talk about basketball, and the basketball the Pacers are playing right now is a little bit confusing, so I guess we're going to hop right into that.
Should be interesting to talk about. Obviously, no Tyrese Halliburton to start the preseason, but there are still some interesting elements to this basketball team. Tell me, what do you think is the most interesting, maybe outside of Tyrese, most interesting thing about the Pacers right now?
Right, so I mean, for these first two games, because they don't have him and they also don't have Andrew Nembhard, who's out with a kidney stone, they're having to play TJ McConnell at point guard, and then when he isn't out there, it's like, oh, let's try Buddy Hield at point guard, let's try Ben Shepherd at point guard, let's try Jarris Walker at point guard. So getting into stuff in the half court, they've had to get pretty creative, and then defensively, I think that's where most of the focus is going to be on with the Pacers. They've been in the bottom five for the last 2 years. They've been very outspoken that they know that they need to improve on that end of the floor, and through the first two games, they've given up 120 points in both. And, without Tyrese, he's not exactly known for his point of attack defense or his ability to track shooters. So they're starting TJ McConnell and Bruce Brown, who are going to be two of their better options out there. And the results so far haven't been, I'm sure what they've wanted. They're giving up a ton of points in the paint. There's been a lot of schematic changes. So I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway through the first two games.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see whether guys like Bruce Brown and maybe even Jarris Walker off the bench could add some defense, some of that athletic punch that this team has been looking for. How have those guys looked, and what are kind of your expectations? Now, you stole Brucey B away from our Nuggets.
Yeah, with Bruce, he's having to do a little bit of the point guard stuff offensively too while Tyrese is gone. But I expect that when Tyrese is back, that Bruce will mainly, at least with the starters, be defending at the point of attack, because you don't really want Tyrese or Ben necessarily doing that. But to this point, because TJ is out there on the floor, they're letting TJ do it. But even with as leaky as the defense has been, because they're much more this season prioritizing keeping shooters at home on the perimeter, it's kind of a sink or swim mentality. They don't exactly have a lot of on-ball stoppers, but it's kind of like when you watch it, hey, you're just going to have to learn. We're not giving you a life preserver. We're not sending a lot of help in a lot of situations. But Bruce, even through all that, as you know, covering the Nuggets, he's just going to have these little moments where he's kind of the little things king. Last night he got beat by Amen Thompson, and he knew that hey, I'm going to keep pursuing this play. He's going to rock the ball back to his left hip. I'm going to reach in and I'm going to poke away the ball and get a deflection. He's done several of those things where he's quietly cleaned up messes for other guys where you can play him off ball or you can play him at the point of attack. So I think that's what attracted the Pacers to him, that he is so malleable, that he can wear so many different hats, even on a roster where they have so many players who are 6'5" and under.
It is interesting to think about the variety of players that they have in that mold, or maybe different molds of around the same size. I'm thinking Benedict Mathurin, Buddy Hield, Andrew Nembhard, Bruce Brown, guys like that. Obviously, Bruce is going to be locked in for the Pacers for the foreseeable future, but where do Mathurin, Hield, and Nembhard kind of stack up in that pecking order? What does it look like with the Pacers kind of heading into this season versus maybe in years past?
Right, so I think the Buddy situation is somewhat up in the air. Both sides have been handling it very diplomatically, and Buddy's going to show up and compete, but obviously with his contract extension, that's stalled out. They're not looking for a trade imminently, but you don't know what the long-term future is going to be there with Buddy if they don't reach something. So Ben has moved back into the starting lineup, or has moved into the starting lineup. That happened over the last 10 games of last season, so it was kind of expected. Buddy's kind of playing a six-man role where when Tyrese comes back, those two know each other like the back of their hands. They have great chemistry. They were the number one assist combination on made threes last year. So I think they're still going to try to get minutes for them on the court together, even if Buddy isn't a starter. And then, with Bruce coming over as the third starter, that means that Andrew Nembhard's gone from being, a key starter last year, who went from being a second-round pick to now probably coming off the bench. And at practices, he's been playing more outside of ball screens. I certainly, when he's healthy and ready to play, I hope that he's playing as the backup point guard and running offense, because you don't really want to see him go last year from being a starter to having a smaller off-ball role next to TJ McConnell necessarily. So I think that's kind of where the pecking order shakes out. And Ben, to his credit, in these first two games has seemed like he's stood out for the right reasons, and that he stood out by fitting in. Last year, he kind of stood out because, he would be somewhat separatist from the offense, but he's been continuing advantage and trying to get the ball moving a little bit more.
It's interesting with a guy like that. There are a couple of different paths of development that you can go with. With him, he is so talented as a scorer and so talented as an athlete that you want to just continue to see where it goes and where it can continue to push. And theoretically, in a lineup with Tyrese Halliburton and Bruce Brown, kind of guys that can either set him up or do the little things, like there should be a role for a guy like Mathurin in a scoring role in a starting lineup. But he's going to have to do those other detail things as well. Because, I mean, if the Pacers continue to have higher expectations, they're going to need to push him even higher. So I'm glad that they're kind of putting him on an island a little bit defensively. That's the only way to teach, is trial by fire, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's somewhat what it has to be on both ends of the floor. In Summer League, I didn't feel the best 2 games, especially from an efficiency standpoint. It's very clear that there's like 3 main things he was going to need to do. Shoot the ball when he's actually open, because he's very wired to catch and drive. When he gets to the rim, be able to make a pass and then make strides defensively. I think the defense has still been fairly rocky in these first 2 games. But in the sense that, like I said, he wants to play at a triple threat so much that when he catches the ball, he typically wants to rip and drive to his left. I think teams have kind of known that. Like even in the first preseason game against Memphis, you could see them loading up whenever he drove left, because I tracked every pass he made last year to the right side of the floor. He never made one with his left hand. So that means that like he's having to turn on his axis and throw a push pass with his right, and the accuracy can kind of be all over the place. But at least in these 2 games, he hasn't just been trying to beat the help and, force up a shot at the rim. He's actually looked to make some of those passes. So I think that they have to at least be pleased with that standpoint of it. And like you said, like without Nembhard and Nesmith both in the starting lineup, they don't have 2 top-tier perimeter defenders, which is going to be baptism by fire, because Ben's going to have to take one of those guys. Like Bruce can take one, he can't guard both. So that's kind of where they've been at.
I don't have a ton of questions about Miles Turner. He seems like a very standard, like quality backup center, and has been for a while, especially with the split between him and Sabonis, and kind of both of them seem to have really flourished in the roles that they've had. Obi Toppin coming over, he's an interesting option. I think he started this last preseason game, if I'm not mistaken. What's the general consensus on Obi versus maybe the new draft pick in Jarris Walker?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, the environment, if Obi's going to make, have a breakout type season, it probably can be better than with the Pacers, because he's going to be playing with Tyrese, who's kind of known. He can get guys paid. You're going to have a better 2-point percentage if you play with Tyrese Halliburton with the way he sets guys up. And then also, he's never played with a stretch big like Miles Turner. He's played with Nerlens Noel. He's played with Mitchell Robinson. He's played with Taj Gibson. That means that Obi doesn't have much opportunity to move toward the basket. And then also going from like the Knicks slower pace scheme to the Pacers being, top 5 in transition frequency and top 5 in time to shoot after a make, gives him a lot of opportunities to run and leak out that fits his kind of electric style of play. But in these 2 games, I think it's shown up that he is somebody that's going to need to play with Tyrese, and that might in part be why they're thinking about starting him, just because I think that partnership is going to be valuable, because he's had some moments where he's leaking out and doing like the Obi Toppin things, but defensively they want to do a lot more switching at the 4 than he ever would have done with the Knicks, and that's been kind of up and down. He can move. His backward mobility is okay, but his lateral is still something that he's going to have to improve on. And then just overall, I think that he's had a few clunky moments offensively in some face-up situations as well. But, Jarris, Obi's kind of the offensive option at that spot, and Jarris is kind of the defensive option. Jarris shot the ball very well in the opening preseason game, made 4 threes, didn't shoot it as well last night in Houston. So that kind of remains to be seen. I kind of still see Jarris a little bit more in the mold of like somebody who's plays more like a big, like fake handoffs and stuff that Draymond does, but it looks so far like the Pacers view him more traditionally as a forward who's going to be doing pump and go and be getting up a lot of threes. So kind of have to see how that efficiency shakes out and what other they do, because they have so many centers on the roster that kind of prevent him from being able to do those other types of things as well.
Last thing here before we get into more prediction stuff, I'm continually fascinated by Tyrese Halliburton and the growth that he had from Sacramento over to Indiana, and just being allowed to flourish in the way that he was. This team's identity clearly has shifted towards him, but it seems like they could go even further. And it seems like the way that you push the pace and you space the floor and you allow Tyrese to set the table for everybody, there are ways that they can continue to even do it even better. Where does Tyrese Halliburton's growth go from here? And what are some things that you've really enjoyed about covering him so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to describe Tyrese, and especially for people in Denver, is that like he's not the caliber of player that Nikola Jokic is. He's not the best player in the world, but they're very similar in that they both take a lot of joy in passing and being pass first, and they're both very cerebral. I've always thought when I watched Jokic, like the longer he's in a series, it was almost to his benefit in the bubble when the Nuggets got in a 1-3 hole. Because the longer he's in a series, he's going to figure out the matchup. And Tyrese is similar, that if he runs into a type of coverage in a game, like last year they played the Timberwolves and Jaden McDaniels gave him some problems, in part because some of the time he was intentionally ducking under and then surging out because Tyrese isn't shoot first. And when they play that game the next time, it's like, oh, okay. Now he's figured out how to get to the next action. He knows how to counter it. Or, he was going head on against Bam Adebayo, only scored a point. They go down to Miami a month later and he scores 43 and makes 10 threes, really hunting the switch pocket. So he just knows how to make adjustments, and he just thinks the game at an extremely high level. So that's very fun to pick apart and be able to do that type of stuff. That covering Jokic for as long as you have. But I think that the Pacers mainly, like I'm sure most people would watch Tyrese and probably want him to still up his usage rate from where it is because he is so efficient, like see what the limits of that are. I tend to look at it a little bit more game by game and seeing like, okay, if he does up it in certain situations, can he do enough against the switch? Can he drive enough against the switch that would be worth it versus attacking that switch in another way 4-on-4? But I think from the Pacers' perspective, it all has to be at the defensive end. And I think that's why they did pursue Bruce Brown. And, they drafted Jarris Walker, trying to decide how they're going to be able to insulate him because he does get hunted a lot at that other end of the floor. They're going to need more from him individually. So, it's a give or take. I expect that like right now they're not shooting the ball very well. And some of that's because Buddy Hield's only been like 1 of 8 in these 2 preseason games, which I don't expect to continue. But you can see that when you put Bruce in the starting lineup, you put Obi in the starting lineup, like that's not the same spacing as last year when it was Andrew Nembhard, Indy Smith, and Buddy Hield around Tyrese to be able to, really stretch his legs in the pick and roll and have all types of room to make reads here, there, and everywhere. So, if you're upgrading the defense, where's kind of the balance there? And have they upgraded the defense? Because so far, doesn't quite look like they have. But I mean, I think that's what they're most looking for. They should be looking for this season as far as building around Tyrese. Are they a team that's just going to have to lean all the way into scoring, kind of like what the Kings have done? Like they're just a team that's like, hey, we're going to play as fast as humanly possible, and we're going to put up as many points as humanly possible around the identity that fits Domantas Sabonis. Is that what you have to be, or do you have enough here where you can strike a balance and improve a little bit defensively? Because, I think if they can get to be, even just top 20, they would have a good enough net rating where they could sniff around at the very least being a play-in team and maybe getting out of the play-in tournament.
No, and I think that's kind of on the threshold of where I have them now. I for what it's worth, I think the defense will improve. It's one of those things that's going to take time. And when you add in these different concepts and you bring in different players, and especially guys like a Bruce Brown, who like he will pick up some things, but the longer that he's there, he'll pick up even more. I think that there's going to be a little bit of a growth factor there from the Pacers. But I mean, as long as Tyrese is healthy and stays healthy throughout the year, there's no reason why this team can't win at least as many games as they won last year, if not way more than that. I have them at 38 wins right now because the bottom, like that middle to bottom of the Eastern Conference is just a nightmare to try to predict. There are so many different directions that any of those teams can go, whether it's Toronto or Indiana or Orlando or just this entire collection of group. Do you have a number that you'd like to throw out there for the Pacers, or is it just a kind of a wait and see approach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't usually put numbers on it. I think when I was on with Nate Duncan, I said 40. And that was before I knew what the Buddy Hield situation was going to be and how some of the other roster might end up turning out. You never know. But I do think that they were at a 44 win rate last year when Miles Turner and Tyrese were both playing, when they were both healthy. So you do think there's some meat left on the bone there. And I do think that they have made upgrades. It's just a matter of, can they get enough defenders on the floor at once? Like they have more, but will they ever be in the same lineup at the same time? Like that's where it gets a little bit tricky because they don't have a lot of, straightforward two-way players. They have a lot of good offensive players and a lot of good defensive players. Can they find the right rotational mix? But I think just based off of last season, I agree with you. I don't see any reason why they can't match the win total from last season and take a step forward. It just depends on what the rest of the mosh pit is there in the, the 7 to 10 range and who really establishes themselves there. But that's where I'm at. Like they played, I mean, I guess what I should say is they played at the same win rate and had the same net rating as the Miami Heat last year when Tyrese and Miles were both available. So basically they're going to the NBA championship. I think that we can all expect a finals trip for the Indiana Pacers this year.
I love it. I mean, as unlikely as the the jump for Miami was. It would be insane if Indiana made that jump. But like, I mean, I'm here for it. I'm here for Tyrese Halliburton jump passes in the finals. That's a dream come true right there. Okay, so last question before I let you go. What would be considered a successful season for the Pacers? If you had to boil it down to one or two things, what are those things that you'd like to see from this group, even if it doesn't manifest in like 45 to 48 wins or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, based on how they maintain flexibility in the summer with what contracts they signed while still trying to make some upgrades, I think it's about attempting to make a push for the playoffs, but not allowing that to interfere completely with the development of the key guys that are on the roster. I think they need to be able to get to the end of the year and definitively say Benedict Mathurin is a critical part of this core and/or Andrew Nembhard is a critical part of this core. Because right now, I think that's still a little bit. At the end of last season, that was still a little bit up in the air in terms of who you would define is the core of the Indiana Pacers. So when you look at Obi Toppin, when you look at Buddy Hield, when you look at Bruce Brown, you don't want those guys to have so much infringed on the development of Jarris Walker and Andrew Nembhard and Benedict Mathurin that you don't find those things out by the end of the year. Because the worst case scenario on the flip side to me is that those guys have larger roles and shift what the roles of the other rookies are to the point where then you get in the play-in tournament and you lose anyways. Then it's kind of going to be like, what was this season for exactly? So I think that they're in a place where they want to try to win more games, but they can't let that come at the sacrifice of development overall for the roster, because I don't think they're in that place yet.
Well, we will see what happens with the Indiana Pacers this year. She is Caitlin Cooper at C2_Cooper on Twitter. Make sure to go follow all of her work at Basketball She Wrote. Caitlin, thank you so much for your conversation today. I'm really excited to get to know the Pacers this year with you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, joining me now is Ty Windisch, who covers the Milwaukee Bucks for the Eurostep podcast and the Eurostep podcast network. Ty, thank you so much for hopping on, man. I'm talking to the most excited person in the NBA this year.
Yeah, you really are. It's quite a time. Certainly, had hoped I thought the Bucks would be interested in getting Dame. That's why, if anyone's wondering, for the NBA reasons. Yeah, in case you hadn't heard, I figured they would try. I didn't think they'd actually do it, and it's certainly quite the cost. A player like Drew Holiday is never easy to trade, and everyone around the Bucks has said that. But all that being said, again, my goodness, what a pairing. So very, very excited to talk to you some more about Dame and Giannis and the rest of the Bucks today. And, really, I'll talk at any time about Dame playing with Giannis. I mean, who wouldn't be excited to talk about that?
It is very exciting, man. And so let's dive right into it then. I want to get your perspective just first and foremost. I was going to ask kind of about the most interesting thing, but I know that that's Giannis and Dame. So yeah. Let's frame it this way. The most interesting thing for this team is, I think, the difference before and after the Dame trade, and kind of how emotionally and how like structurally and how I think a lot of people feel about the Bucks and their chances this year. Do you think that that's just a drastic difference since before and after the Dame trade?
Yeah, I think so. I think defense is a thing most people are glomming onto, and certainly that's going to be an adjustment for the Bucks. They're going to have to defend a little differently. I think we expected them to a certain degree anyway, just with a new coaching staff coming in anyway. But I think there may almost be too much attention paid to that right now, and I think not quite enough to what this team will be able to do offensively. I mean, in the days after the trade, even until now, there's these questions of, it is going to be an adjustment process. How's the fit going to be? Is Chris Middleton going to fit? I think it's a little overthought. I mean, I think Dame and Giannis is such a perfectly made pairing, and they've both said, they're studying film. They want to make sure they fully understand each other. They're really not going out there and saying like, oh, this is going to be easy. This is going to be, these guys, right? Oh, we have to work. It's all about the work. It's so boring, you guys. I would be having a lot more fun if I was Dame or Giannis in these press conferences, but that's why I'm sitting here at a desk in a bedroom. So, but I think Chris is going to be really set up to have a great year off of those two. I think Brooke, with how he's stretchy, is gonna be a perfect center for these lineups. So, I think defensively they're gonna have work to do, and I think I understand why people are questioning with kind of the perimeter defenders they have in Dame and Chris and whoever the fifth starter is, what their defense will look like when you lose a Drew Holiday. It's certainly a huge hit. I think just focusing on that is missing the forest for the trees when you have the ability to pair Dame and Giannis, given the offensive issues the Bucks have had in the playoffs. I think there's just no question it's such a huge net positive, even if defensively you are a little bit worse.
It does kind of remind me of when LeBron James and Anthony Davis were paired with the Los Angeles Lakers initially, where that first season there were a lot of questions as to the depth. Who's the third best player on the team? What does the rest of the roster look like? Are they going to be able to space the floor, play defense, etc.? And then that team just killed the entire time. So I think that this team is going to kill. I think this team is going to be really, really, really freaking good. And you have to boil it down to the Giannis and Dame pairing first and foremost. I'm partial as a Nuggets guy to Jokic and Murray, given that they just won the title. But I can understand anybody that says that they believe that Giannis and Dame is going to be the best duo in the NBA this year. Just what do you think about the intricacies of that duo? What do you think makes them so great?
I mean, I think it's going to be the most unique pairing that we've seen in quite some time. I don't mean to be, sound like a prisoner of the moment, but I think you could make the case one of the most interesting pairings ever because of the respective gravity they both bring. Because we just haven't been in the 3-point shooting era long enough. And I'm not making player comps here, to be clear, get ahead of that. But you look at some of the legendary duos in the league, like, a Shaq and Kobe, right? Kobe was obviously a pull-up threat, but the gravity didn't extend out like Dame's. Just the game wasn't played that way in the early 2000s. And of course, Giannis in this era of, teams wanting to stretch out, his gravity around the basket right now is certainly up there with the biggest players ever, especially given the era and not having so many low post bruisers around to defend him. And I just think it's going to be such a fascinating mesh of what do defenses do? Dame has wondered this. What do you do? Do you switch? Dame's really good against switches. Louis Zatzman wrote a great article for Bucks.com about how Dame is tremendous against switches. And those are two players that good luck finding two guys who can guard both well enough to switch them because they're so different.
Yeah, absolutely.
You go under, Dame is shooting. You go over, Giannis in an advantage rolling to the rim. Giannis is a problem when he's at a disadvantage, going toward the rim. So I just think anything that they do is going to be fascinating. But of course, the biggest focus is the pick and roll. What's the pick and roll look like? How do teams guard the pick and roll? I think they're going to do more horns. I've seen some great clips of Dame in Portland running that set a bunch. He's already said he joked with Terry Stotts about, bringing back multiple sets that he's used to and incorporating them into the offense. There's going to be Bucks fans listening who go, our offense is going to have sets. That sounds great. It's just sets in general would be good after some of these playoff losses. So yeah, I think the interesting thing is just for this duo, what can teams even do to stop the gravity on both ends? Because if you give either guy any sliver, they're just so dangerous and it's so immediate how quickly they'll make a defense pay. So I just feel like there's going to be so much tremendous pressure with something as simple as a pick and roll. Of course, as you mentioned, Jokic and Murray, I think that is the same level, even if, Murray is not looked at as a Dame. Jokic just giving the all-around spacing threat and them being so prolific and comfortable with each other. It's a similar idea, and we've seen teams have similar issues doing anything with it. It's really hard to handle those combinations. So I think just getting to watch these guys go into this over and over and make defenses much more stressed than the Bucks typically do, just because they were so predictable. It seemed like at times in the last few years, even with a dominating force like Giannis, defenses got comfortable. I just don't think that comfort's going to be there with this Bucks team.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And to kind of add to that Jokic and Murray versus Giannis and Dame distinction, on the offensive end, I think I see Jokic and Murray as two different 3-level scorers where they are each kind of intertwined with where they can operate on the floor. And that versatility makes them so dangerous. The thing with the Bucks is that you have the best versions of each of those ideals, where you've got the best rim gravity and the best 3-point gravity, or at least very close to it on each of those sides. So it's going to be an absolute monstrous duo, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to see how teams guard it, because there is going to be a lot of overloading in the paint. So there's going to be a lot of overloading at the 3-point line for those guys, probably sending 3 to guard 2, which means that somebody else is open. So Can you tell me about Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, and maybe Pat Connaughton? Like, are those guys, do you think, ready for the task at hand when it comes to making those extra shots?
Yeah, I really do. I think Chris especially is probably, I've said he's going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries here because he's had so many tremendous runs. I mean, obviously they win a championship with him as often the primary ball handler in crunch time. But, anyone familiar with Chris's game knows he always would have been better suited being a little bit lower in the offensive pecking order. He doesn't have the most refined handle. He's not an amazing finisher. He finishes strong, but he doesn't have a great handle. He doesn't have a great finishing package. So letting him operate against disadvantaged defenses where he's either getting open shots, which Chris is an elite shooter. I think that's always been consistent. And if he's operating versus a closeout versus against an engaged defense, that just gives him such a leg up. So I think he's going to be set up to really feast in these lineups. I think Brook Lopez, the three-point shooting, he works with that Noah system. It's improved over the last couple of years after being a little flaky, but just the gravity he provides. And obviously, again, maybe we'll see more of Brook around the paint too. There might be more room for him in the dunker spot if that Giannis Dame pick and roll is moved up the floor. I mean, this is a player who became the Nets all-time leading scorer all around the basket. So wherever he's at on the floor, he's a threat. I think Pat certainly trusts. He had a down year, three-point shooting last season, but was good again in the playoffs. And he's now working with that Noah system too. So Bucks fans are very excited about that after seeing Brook shoot a lot better this past year. What's going to be really interesting is can a player like Marjon Beauchamp get on the floor more? I mean, certainly they could use an athletic wing defender. Apparently in camp, he looks great. So do the other 450 NBA players, but still, apparently he looks great in camp. And I think he's going to have a shot to, if not start, certainly play a huge role because they just need that archetype. And I think you can afford a little less offense now with, of course, Dame coming in for Drew. So I think someone like Pat would be more likely to close because that's just someone you trust. I mean, when you've got Mike Breen bangs in the finals, there's just a different level of comfort there as an auxiliary player on the floor. I mean, that's a special feeling for any team fan to see their role player get those. I mean, that matters. But yeah, I think that crew is set up to do enough. I think they were, they managed to do enough to 2+ years ago when the Bucks won. And I think they're all going to be asked to do a bit less. So even if they are a little worse off than then, I think that's okay. And I think for Chris, he's still not fully practicing. Sounds like he's hoping to be ready by game 1 this year, taking it slow on the ramp up, but not dealing with issues, which I think is critical for him. He says he feels great. They're just taking it easy with him. He looked really good in the playoffs, even before that surgery, 26-6 on good shooting numbers. So I'm pretty confident he'll be ready and he'll be able to do what the Bucks need him to do, which again, less than ever before, which I think is crucial.
Obviously, you mentioned perimeter defense a little bit at the beginning here. When you trade a guy like Drew, and one other thing, you lose a guy like Javon Carter, who I'm now thinking about the rotation and thinking about, man, it would have been nice to hold on to that guy if you knew that a Drew Holiday trade was potentially in the works. But is there enough perimeter defense, you think, for a championship run this year? I suspect the answer is yes, given that you have two of the best anchors in the NBA. But I just want to know, it's going to be pretty matchup based, and I think there's probably going to be a lot of guys that can be targeted.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's probably an audition period from now until early February for the various perimeter players on this team to prove to John Horst and Adrian Griffin that there is. And I think if there's not, and maybe either way, because it feels like Horst usually finds some sort of perimeter defender at the deadline, even if it doesn't seem like a huge weakness. I would imagine that we see more players, or at least one more player like that added. I think right now, certainly it looks short. Dame says he'll be able to focus more on that end while doing less defensively. Still not going to, pencil in an all defensive campaign for Dame, nor did he say that, to be clear. But, that is what it is. Chris used to be a great 3-and-D player, but certainly, with the age and the injuries and the more offensive load, he's taken on a less of a role there. Although, again, if he's doing less offensively and he's feeling good, it looks like he's actually dropped some weight as well, which, again, so did everyone else, lost or gained 20 vital pounds. But he's looking good, so we'll see if he can be a little better than he was last season. But then it comes to, can a player like Marjon stick in the rotation? Can Pat Connaughton, who's like a good positional defender, be good enough of a positional defender with the back line of Giannis and Brook, which, you have top two defensive player of the year guys over the last 5 or so years. That's a pretty good place to start. But certainly they are going to need some help. And, the bench mob right now of like Cameron Payne, Malik Beasley, you're not seeing elite defenders there. Jay Crowder being able to have a more complete season. He looked good in the regular season, bad in the playoffs. That would make a huge deal as well. I think Crowder will factor in there. I feel like they're probably a defender light, but if one of the rookies, one of the young guys, Crowder, can really stick and be a big part of the rotation, maybe it looks a lot better, when the games are actually happening than it does right now.
I think it's completely fair, and I think that that's one of the good things about the regular season, especially in today's NBA. It's not necessarily about winning 65 games anymore. It's about ramping up and making sure that you are your best self at the end of the road as opposed to at the beginning of the road. I think a couple of teams have learned their lessons from that in recent years, like the Phoenix Suns and Boston Celtics. So there are some reasons to believe in the Bucks kind of slowly ramping up Chris, slowly ramping up who they need to on the defensive end, and then figuring out by the deadline. So I am going to predict this team to win 55 games. I'm not going to predict them to win that much more. I know they won 58 last year. I think that there is not like an actual regression coming in the regular season. It's just about what they're focusing on. It's about, hey, Dame is probably not going to play 70 games. He's probably going to play a lesser amount. And maybe Giannis even plays a lesser amount. He's been secretly a little bit injured over the course of these past few years too. So I have them winning 55. Is that fair? Is that too low? That's second in the East.
It wouldn't surprise me if they ended up close to that 58 number again, honestly, just because looking back, they were really dealt with a lot of injuries last season. As you mentioned, Giannis missed, right, I think 19 games, or either Giannis or Drew did, and the other one missed about 15. And then, of course, Chris, looked like a shell of himself for a handful that he did play and missed more than half the season. And they still cranked out 58. And you lose some depth pieces, Javon Carter, Wesley Matthews, Joe Ingles, guys like that. But, you add in a Jay Crowder who didn't play very much. Malik Beasley is a new addition. Cameron Payne. I don't think they're worlds more shallow. So, I don't know. I know they outwon their net rating last season. They honestly had kind of a weird regular season for how many games they won. I think 55 is fair. It wouldn't surprise me if they were the 1 seed again. This is a team that has really just won at a high level, no matter who's been available. I know they dropped to, I think, like third or so in the East the year Brook missed a lot of games when the defense faltered. But again, they find ways to win. They really do. And I don't think the new coaching staff is going to go away from that very often. So I'm thinking high 50s. I think there's a shot they win 60. Even if they're cautious and guys sit, there's just a shot that Giannis and Dame run over teams, right? Like, I think that's on the table for them. We'll see what happens. I don't think they're going to chase that by any means, but I don't think they were really chasing 58 either, and it just kind of happened. So especially look at the East. Boston looks great. They're certainly ramping up. I think the Cavs got a lot better. Otherwise, though, I think most of the teams, we'll see what Philly is like, but I think most of the teams are a clear level below the Bucks level or more than that. So I think you can kind of accidentally pile up some wins that way.
Yeah, just for posterity's sake, I have Boston at 56 and Milwaukee at 55. So it's not like there are going to be some wins that kind of shift over to the West, I think, but in general, it is going to be a bloodbath at the top between those two top teams, Boston and Milwaukee. So I'm very curious to see how that pans out. If you had to predict it right now, does this team win a finals?
Yeah, I think so, honestly. When you can roll in with Giannis and Dame together, I think, as we talked about earlier, I by the way, agree with just giving it to the champion. Like, I'm not going to argue you on Jokic Murray. Like, we just saw those guys do it in very dominant fashion. That means a lot to me. Someone's got to unseat the Nuggets. So, but not to argue who's one, who's two, or get into the weeds. Let's just put it this way. You feel as good as any team's top two if you come in with Damian Lillard and Giannis. And I think the supporting cast around them is really strong. I don't think they have maybe the top 6 of Boston, but I think they're deep enough overall to complement that top 2. And I just think that pairing is just going to be so devastating. So assuming they figure out the defense or add another good defender at the deadline, I really like their chances this year to get a second one in 3 years here for the Bucks.
Ty, I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot this year. We're going to be talking a lot, chatting a lot about the progress from the Bucks and what it looks like, maybe detailing some of those matchups, maybe even detailing a finals matchup. That seems like a possibility between the Bucks and maybe the Nuggets. So should be a lot of fun. Ty, thank you so much for hopping on. He is Ty Windisch, host of the Eurostep podcast. Make sure to go follow his work. Thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. It was a blast. Certainly looking forward to talking again soon about some great teams here.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Alley-Oop with Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much to Kevin Ferrigan, Justin Rowan, Khalil, Caitlin Cooper, Ty Windisch for taking the time with me this season. Really happy with the way that things have come out, especially with the Central Division. How awesome is that group? Thank you so much for tuning in. Up next is the Pacific Division on Thursday. You know them well, the LA Lakers, the Clippers, the Kings, the Suns, and the Golden State Warriors. Should be a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Hit those like buttons and the subscribe button on the YouTube channel, and make sure to rate, review, and follow the channel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all the love and support. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.